Good day, everyone. My name is Steve Koleno, and before we begin, I want to note that these remarks are confidential and intended only for this audience. Today, we're going to explore a shift that many people are experiencing but often struggle to describe. On the surface, it can feel like a loss of motivation, a loss of drive, or a sense that things that once mattered no longer carry the same weight. But what if that isn't a decline? What if it's actually a signal? This presentation is about learning to distinguish between the noise that constantly competes for our attention and the deeper signal that points us toward alignment, authenticity, and meaning. By the end, my goal is to help you understand why discomfort may not be your enemy, why old motivations can fade, and how to recognize what is genuinely calling you forward. Many people reach a point where family gatherings feel forced, conversations feel repetitive, and activities that once brought excitement suddenly feel empty. The immediate assumption is that something must be wrong. We tell ourselves we've become disconnected, less motivated, or somehow diminished. But there is another possibility. What we often interpret as losing our edge may actually be losing our tolerance for what never felt fully true in the first place. The passion isn't necessarily gone. The distraction may be. The discomfort comes from withdrawing energy from systems, relationships, and expectations that no longer align with who we are becoming. What feels like numbness may simply be the absence of constant stimulation that used to drown out our inner voice. And when that noise fades, we finally begin to hear ourselves. The world is designed to keep us moving. There is always another goal, another opportunity, another trend, another crisis, and another thing demanding our attention. We are surrounded by constant input, pressure to perform, pressure to achieve, and pressure to stay relevant. The challenge isn't that these forces exist. The challenge is that they move so quickly we rarely stop long enough to ask whether we're heading in the right direction. A system built on speed naturally discourages reflection. When we're constantly chasing the next thing, we never have to examine the last thing. And sometimes the questions we avoid are exactly the questions we need most. The architecture of distraction isn't just external. Over time, it becomes internalized until busyness feels normal and stillness feels uncomfortable. Many of us built a version of ourselves that was extremely effective. That version knew how to perform, achieve, adapt, and meet expectations. It generated results. It earned approval. It often created success. But success and alignment are not always the same thing. At some point, people begin noticing that the version of themselves that once worked no longer feels sustainable. What remains is a person who is less willing to cooperate with chaos, less interested in pretending, and less available for what feels inauthentic. This can feel confusing because the old identity delivered rewards. But growth often requires releasing loyalty to a version of ourselves that no longer fits. We are not lost. We are simply outgrowing a role we once needed. When the constant outward pull begins to weaken, something unexpected happens. Space appears. For many people, that space feels uncomfortable. It feels empty. It feels uncertain. Sometimes it even feels like loss. But this flatness is not a dead end. It is often the necessary absence of stimulation. For years, many of us relied on activity, achievement, distraction, or validation to create a sense of identity. When those external sources become less powerful, we are left face to face with ourselves. That encounter can feel unsettling. Yet it is also where clarity begins. The silence is not proof that something is missing. It may be proof that something real is finally emerging. Most of us have been taught to trust our minds above all else. The mind is incredibly valuable. It analyzes, strategizes, plans, and solves problems. But the mind was never designed to determine purpose. Its role is execution. Direction comes from somewhere deeper. You can think of the heart as an internal compass. It responds to resonance. It recognizes what feels alive, meaningful, and true. At some point, many people invert this relationship. They allow logic to choose the destination and then force themselves to follow. The result is often achievement without fulfillment. The discomfort many people feel today may actually be a correction. A system that has been operating backward is trying to restore its natural order. For much of our lives, we learn how to become acceptable. We learn what to say, how to behave, and what success is supposed to look like. Over time, those adaptations can become so familiar that we mistake them for who we are. But authenticity is different. Authenticity does not require performance. It does not require constant validation. It does not depend on appearances. When we strip away the need to impress, compete, or conform, something remains. That remaining core is where truth lives. The real work is not becoming more impressive. The real work is becoming more honest. And honesty creates a level of freedom that performance can never provide. Every meaningful transformation begins with disruption. The old path becomes increasingly difficult to follow. What once felt natural starts feeling forced. At first, this can look like confusion. It can even look like failure, but often it is neither. It is simply a change in trajectory. The old path was built around comfort, familiarity, and external expectations. The new path is built around meaning, and meaning rarely announces itself with certainty. Instead, it appears through curiosity, resonance, and a growing inability to ignore what matters. The transition is messy, but it is also necessary, because eventually the cost of staying the same becomes greater than the uncertainty of moving forward. We live in a time when information is abundant. Ideas can be manufactured, narratives can be engineered, appearances can be replicated. Logic remains important, but logic alone is no longer enough. A person can construct a perfectly reasonable argument for something that is completely false. They can justify decisions that feel deeply wrong. They can convince themselves of almost anything. This is why discernment is becoming more important than simple intelligence. The question is no longer whether something makes sense. The question is whether it is true, and truth requires more than analysis. It requires connection to something deeper than information alone. Discernment is not the same as intelligence. Intelligence analyzes. Discernment recognizes. Intelligence gathers information. Discernment filters information. Intelligence helps us understand what is happening. Discernment helps us understand what matters. In a world filled with persuasive narratives and endless opinions, discernment becomes essential. It allows us to sense when something is off, even when it appears convincing. It helps us identify what aligns with our values, our purpose, and our deeper knowing. The ultimate goal is not to collect more information. The goal is to find the signal that remains after all the noise has been filtered away. Most people treat discomfort as something to eliminate. The moment it appears, they search for relief. But discomfort often serves a different purpose. It functions as information. When ignored, it tends to repeat itself. The same frustrations appear. The same patterns return. The same lessons resurface. Not because life is punishing us, but because life is trying to get our attention. There are two paths available. One path seeks immediate relief and returns to familiar misalignment. The other path pauses, listens, and investigates what the discomfort is trying to reveal. Growth begins when we stop asking how to escape discomfort and start asking what it is trying to teach us. As we close, I want to return to the central idea of this presentation. If things feel flat, uncertain, or undefined right now, resist the urge to immediately fix them. What you may be experiencing is not a loss of drive. It may be the loss of your willingness to participate in something that no longer feels true. Once you begin hearing your internal signal, the old distractions lose their power. You start recognizing the difference between what is expected and what is authentic. You begin choosing meaning over performance. And once that awareness arrives, it becomes very difficult to go backward, because what once felt normal starts feeling like a compromise. The invitation is simple. Trust the signal, listen carefully, and allow it to guide you toward a life that is increasingly aligned with who you truly are. This has been Confidential Remarks.